The rain was a merciless percussionist, drumming a frantic, desperate rhythm on the thin roof of my apartment building. Each drop that found its way through the crack in the ceiling above my son's bed landed in the plastic bucket with a hollow plink that echoed the hollowness in my chest. It was a sound I had come to despise, the soundtrack to my slow-motion collapse. 4 years old, and my Leo was already an expert at sleeping through the symphony of our poverty. His small chest rose and fell in the dim glow of his dinosaur nightlight, a fragile piece in the center of my chaotic world. I stood in the doorway of his room, my nurse's scrubs damp and smelling of antiseptic and the city's perpetual grime, a weariness so profound it felt etched into my bones. Another double shift at the free clinic, another 24 hours of stitching up the broken, soothing the frightened, and handing out kindness I couldn't seem to reserve for myself. My own bank account was the patient I couldn't save. It was hemorrhaging money I didn't have. The eviction notice was a stark white ghost on the kitchen counter, its bold red letters screaming a deadline that was now only 3 days away. Beside it, a stack of bills formed a leaning tower of failure. Leo's asthma medication was running low. The refrigerator contained little more than a half-empty carton of milk and a wilting head of lettuce. And Mark, well, Mark was a black hole where my hope used to be. His text message from earlier burned on my phone's screen, a monument to his spectacular selfishness. "Laura, babe, need 200. It's an emergency. For Leo, you know?" He always said it was for Leo. It was never for Leo. It was for a poker game, a bad bet, a new scheme that was guaranteed to fail just like all the others. The last time I'd given him money, our electricity had been cut off for 2 days. I'd had to read Leo bedtime stories by candlelight, pretending it was a fun camping adventure while my stomach twisted with shame. I hadn't replied to his text. I knew the silence would bring him here, a storm of a different kind, and I dreaded it with every fiber of my being. A gust of wind rattled the window pane, and I pulled my thin cardigan tighter around myself. I needed to get out, to breathe air that wasn't thick with the scent of damp and despair. I needed a few moments where I wasn't Nurse Alara, or worried mommy, or Mark's exhausted ex. Just Alara. I scribbled a quick note for Mrs. Gable next door, who always kept an ear out for Leo, and slipped out into the deluge. The streetlights cast long, shimmering reflections on the slick black asphalt, blurring the edges of the world into an impressionistic nightmare. The rain was cold, instantly soaking through my worn sneakers and plastering my hair to my scalp. It was a cleansing, in a way, a punishment. I walked without direction, my head bowed against the wind, letting the sheer misery of the weather match the storm inside me. I turned down a narrow side street, a shortcut I sometimes took from the bus stop, where the overflowing dumpsters from a nearby restaurant created a rank, unholy perfume. It was in the deepest shadow of the alley, beyond the halo of the nearest street lamp, that I saw him. At first, he was just a darker shape against the brick wall, a heap of wet clothes. My first instinct, born of city-living caution, was to turn and walk away. He was probably just some drunk sleeping it off. But then a low groan cut through the sound of the rain, a sound of pure, undiluted pain. It was a sound I knew from the clinic, from the emergency room. It was the sound of a body in revolt. My feet stopped moving. My conscience, the same one that had dragged me through nursing school and into a thankless job, wouldn't let me leave. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to run. This was how women ended up on the 10 o'clock news. But the groan came again, tighter this time, and I saw a hand clench against the grimy pavement. My training took over. a force stronger than my fear. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and thin against the wind. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" No answer. I took a hesitant step closer, my phone clutched in my hand like a useless talisman. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I could make out more details. He was large, broad-shouldered, even slumped as he was. He wore a dark, expensive-looking suit, now ruined with rainwater and something else, something darker. My nurse's brain catalogued the signs before I was even fully aware of them. The unnatural pallor of his skin under the distant light, the shallow, rapid breaths, the way he was holding his side, a protective, instinctual gesture. "I'm a nurse," I said, taking another step. "I can help. Let me see." I knelt beside him, the rough, wet concrete biting into my knees through my thin pants. The smell hit me then, the coppery, metallic scent of blood, sharp and alarming, cutting through the smell of the rain and garbage. It was a lot of blood. His white shirt, visible where his jacket had fallen open, was saturated with it, a gruesome flower blooming across his ribs. "You've been hurt," I stated, my voice shifting into the calm, professional tone I used at work. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford, not when someone was bleeding in front of me. I reached into my worn tote bag, my fingers searching for the small, cobbled-together first aid kit I always carried. It wasn't much, some gauze, antiseptic wipes, a roll of medical tape, but it was better than nothing. His head lifted slightly at my touch. In the faint light, I saw a face carved from harsh angles and shadow, a strong jaw covered in dark stubble, a straight nose, and eyes that were startlingly intense, even clouded with pain. They were the color of storm clouds, a deep, turbulent gray, and they fixed on me with a shocking lucidity. He wasn't drunk. He was hurt, badly, and he was dangerously aware. "Don't call anyone," he rasped, his voice a low gravel that seemed to vibrate through the ground. Each word was an effort. "You need a hospital," I insisted, gently pulling back the sodden fabric of his jacket and shirt. The wound was a vicious-looking gash, deep and angry, a knife wound, most likely. It was bleeding sluggishly now, which was both a good and a bad sign. "This is serious. You could have internal bleeding." "No, hospital," he repeated, his voice gaining a sliver of strength, an unmistakable edge of command. His hand shot out, impossibly fast, and his fingers wrapped around my wrist. His grip was like iron, cold and unyielding, a stark contrast to the tremors I could feel running through his body. A jolt of pure, primal fear shot through me. This was a mistake, a terrible, life-altering mistake. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. His storm-gray eyes held mine, and in their depths, I saw not just pain, but a chilling authority. This was not a man accustomed to being disobeyed. He was a predator, wounded but still lethal, and I was a mouse that had just wandered into his cage. "Please," I whispered, the word feeling flimsy and inadequate. "You're bleeding. I just want to stop the bleeding." He stared at me for a long moment, his gaze searching my face, assessing me. I felt stripped bare, my exhaustion, my fear, my foolish, bleeding heart compassion all laid out for his inspection. Slowly, painstakingly, he released my wrist. It was a concession, not a surrender. "Do it," he grunted. My hands were shaking, but I forced them steady. I tore open a packet of antiseptic wipes, the alcohol stinging the air. "This is going to hurt," I warned. He just grunted in response. I cleaned the edges of the wound as best I could in the dim, wet light. He didn't flinch, didn't make a sound, though I could feel the muscles in his abdomen tense into knots of granite beneath my fingers. His control was terrifying. I pressed a thick pad of gauze against the gash, applying firm, direct pressure. He hissed, a sharp intake of breath, the first real sign of the agony he must be in. "Hold this," I instructed, guiding his hand to the gauze pad. "Press hard." He did, his own large hand covering mine for a moment. His skin was cold, clammy, but the strength was still there, a dormant volcano of power. I worked quickly, using the entire roll of medical tape to secure the dressing, creating a makeshift bandage that was ugly but functional. It wouldn't hold for long, but it might be enough. "It's not a permanent solution," I said, my voice quiet. "You need stitches. You need a doctor." "I have a doctor," he bit out, leaning his head back against the brick wall and closing his eyes. His face was pale, beaded with a mixture of rain and sweat. He looked like a fallen god, something powerful brought low by mortal means. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't just leave him here, but I couldn't stay. Leo was alone. Mark was a looming threat. My own life was a sinking ship. I had no business trying to patch up a dangerous stranger in a dark alley. As if reading my thoughts, he opened his eyes again. "Your name." It wasn't a question. It was a demand. "Ilara," I breathed. He seemed to taste the name, rolling it over in his mind. "Ilara." He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket, his movements slow and pained. He pulled out a sleek, black wallet and a pen. With unsteady fingers, he tore a corner from a crisp $100 bill and scribbled something on it. "Take this," he said, pressing the small piece of paper into my hand. It was a phone number, just a string of digits. "If you ever need anything at all, you call this number." I stared at it. It felt like a brand, a link to a world I wanted no part of. I can't," I stammered. "It's not a request," he said, his voice dropping lower, each word laced with an unnerving finality. His eyes locked onto mine again. "You helped me. I pay my debts." Before I could argue, the sound of a car engine, deep and throaty, echoed down the alley. A pair of headlights cut through the rain, washing us in a brilliant, blinding white light. A black sedan, the kind that looks like it's made of polished obsidian, slid to a silent stop a few feet away. A man in a suit, broad and impassive as a brick wall, got out of the driver's side. He moved with an efficient, predatory grace, his eyes scanning the alley before landing on us. He showed no surprise, only a flicker of grim concern. "Boss," the man said, his voice flat. The man I had helped, the man whose name I didn't even know, pushed himself off the wall, using it for support. He swayed on his feet, but his presence seemed to fill the alley, diminishing everything else. He was a king, however wounded, and his court had arrived. "Get me out of here." "Julian," he ordered. He took a step, then looked back at me one last time. His gray eyes were impossible to read, but they burned into me, memorizing me. "Remember what I said, Ilara." And then he was gone. Julian helped him into the back of the car. The door closed with a solid, expensive thud, and the vehicle reversed silently out of the alley, its red taillights disappearing into the rainy night. I was left alone, kneeling on the wet pavement, my first aid kit empty, my heart hammering against my ribs. The small, torn piece of $100 bill was still clutched in my hand, the ink of the phone number slightly smeared by the rain. It felt heavier than it should, like the weight of a promise or a threat. I didn't know which. I only knew that my life, already teetering on a knife's edge, had just tilted into an abyss. The next 2 days were a blur of escalating panic. The encounter in the alley felt like a fever dream, a strange, violent interruption to my regularly scheduled programming of quiet desperation. I tried to push it from my mind, focusing on the immediate, tangible threats. I picked up an extra shift, working until my feet were swollen and my back screamed in protest. But the money I earned was a single drop in an ocean of debt. Leo developed a cough, a dry, wheezing sound that sent tendrils of ice through my veins. The pharmacist looked at me with pity when I could only afford half of his prescription refill. I felt like I was drowning, the surface getting further and further away with every breath I took. And then Mark arrived. He didn't knock. He used the key I'd been foolish enough to never demand back, letting himself into the apartment as if he still belonged there. He brought the smell of stale cigarette smoke and cheap whiskey with him, a toxic cologne that instantly soured the air. "Lara, babe," he said, his voice a wheedling whine that set my teeth on edge. He stood in the middle of my small living room, his eyes darting around, taking in the bucket, catching the rainwater, the threadbare rug, the general air of decay. There was no sympathy in his gaze, only a scavenger's assessment of what was left to take. "What do you want, Mark?" I asked, stepping between him and the hallway that led to Leo's room. My son was napping, and the last thing I wanted was for him to wake up to this. "You didn't answer my text," he said, pouting like a petulant child. "I told you, it's an emergency." I got into a little trouble. "Some guys, they're not very nice, Lara." "I just need 200. I'll pay you back next week, I swear." It was the same lie he'd been telling for 5 years. Next week never came. "I don't have it," I said, my voice flat and hard. "I don't have anything, Mark. We have an eviction notice on the counter and no food in the fridge. So whatever trouble you're in, you'll have to find your own way out of it." His face, usually slack with a kind of lazy charm, hardened into something ugly. "Don't give me that. You always have something squirreled away. The righteous Saint Alara, always prepared. Come on, just check your purse." He took a step toward me, and I stood my ground, my body rigid. "No, get out. Don't be like that," he snarled, his voice losing its cajoling tone and taking on a nasty edge. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep. "I'm not asking." Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through my exhaustion. He had never been violent before, not really. There had been slammed doors and shouted words, but he had never laid a hand on me with actual malice. But I saw something different in his eyes now, a wild, cornered desperation that terrified me. He was capable of anything. "Let go of me, Mark," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Not until you give me the money," he shouted, his grip tightening. Leo coughed in his sleep, a small rattling sound from down the hall, and my fear morphed into a white-hot rage. "Get out of my house," I screamed, trying to wrench my arm free. He shoved me. It wasn't a hard shove, but it was enough to send me stumbling back against the wall. The impact jarred my teeth, and in that moment, something inside me broke. The last thread of my resilience, my belief that I could handle this on my own, just snapped. I was done being strong, done being capable, done being the only thing standing between my son and a world that wanted to chew them up and spit them out. My eyes landed on my purse, lying on the small entryway table, and inside that purse was my wallet. And tucked inside my wallet was a small, torn piece of $100 bill with a phone number scrawled on it. "If you ever need anything, anything at all." It was an insane thought, a mad, desperate gamble. calling a dangerous stranger I'd patched up in an alley. What could he possibly do? What would he want in return? But as Mark took another menacing step toward me, his face contorted in a mask of selfish fury, I knew I had no other cards to play. This was my last, wild, Hail Mary pass. With a burst of adrenaline, I dodged around him, snatched my phone from the counter, and locked myself in the tiny, mildewed bathroom. Mark started pounding on the door immediately. "Alara, open this door. Don't you dare call the cops. You know what they'll do? Nothing. They'll do nothing." My hands were trembling so violently I could barely unlock my phone. I fumbled for my wallet, my fingers pulling out the scrap of paper. I punched the numbers in, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I pressed the call button, my breath held tight in my chest. It rang once, twice, then a voice answered. A voice I recognized instantly. It was the same low, gravelly timbre from the alley, but now it was clear, crisp, and radiating an unnerving, absolute authority. There was no pain in it now, only power. Yes, just that one word. It hung in the air, a statement of fact. I was so stunned I couldn't speak. "Who is this?" the voice demanded, a thread of impatience entering his tone. It's Alara," I stammered, my voice a choked whisper. Mark's fist slammed against the door again, making the cheap wood shudder. "The nurse, from the alley, the other night." There was a pause on the other end of the line. It was a silence so profound, so heavy, I thought he might have hung up. But I could feel him there, a tangible presence on the other end of the signal. I could almost picture him, seeing my face in his mind. "I found you," he said, and it wasn't a question or a statement of surprise. It was a declaration of victory. It sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with a strange, terrifying sense of inevitability. "What do you need, Alara?" he asked, his voice dropping, becoming focused, intense. I'm in trouble," I whispered, tears finally breaking free and streaming down my face. "My ex, he's here. He wants money. He won't leave." He pushed me. The words tumbled out. A pathetic, jumbled confession of my own powerlessness. "Is your son there?" The question was sharp, precise. "Yes, he's sleeping. Lock the door to his room. Do not open the bathroom door. What is your address?" I gave it to him, my voice shaking. Mark was shouting my name, his threats becoming more vulgar. "I'm sending someone," the man said. His voice was calm, but it was the calm of a hurricane's eye. A deep, deadly stillness before the storm. "They will be there in 5 minutes. Do not open the door for anyone but them. They will identify themselves. Do you understand?" "Yes," I breathed. "Alara," he said, and my name on his lips was both a comfort and a brand. "This man will never bother you again. I promise you." He hung up. I was left with the dial tone buzzing in my ear and the sound of Mark's impotent rage on the other side of the door. 5 minutes. It felt like an eternity and no time at all. I did as he said, creeping out of the bathroom while Mark was in the kitchen, likely looking for anything of value. I darted into Leo's room and quietly turned the flimsy lock on his door. I prayed it would be enough. Then I retreated back to the bathroom, slid to the floor, and wrapped my arms around my knees, waiting for a salvation I couldn't begin to comprehend. It was less than 5 minutes. I knew because the antique clock on my living room wall had only ticked 3 times. The sound wasn't of a single car, but of multiple engines, deep and rumbling, idling in a synchronized purr that vibrated through the floorboards of the old building. Mark's shouting stopped abruptly. The sudden silence was more terrifying than his noise had been. I heard the creak of the floorboards as he moved to the window. "What the hell?" he muttered, his voice laced with a new kind of fear. Not the fear of a bully being stood up to, but the fear of a prey animal that has just realized the hunters have arrived. A sharp, authoritative knock echoed on our apartment door. It wasn't the police. It was too solid, too confident. I heard Mark stumble back from the door. "Who is it?" he called out, his voice cracking. "We are here for Alara Jensen," a calm, flat voice announced from the other side. "Open the door." I heard Mark fumbling with the locks, his bravado completely evaporated. The moment the door opened, the atmosphere in the apartment changed. The air became heavy, charged with an unspoken authority. I couldn't see what was happening, but I could hear it. The quiet scrape of expensive leather shoes on my cheap linoleum. The soft rustle of tailored suits. "Where is she?" the same flat voice asked. It belonged to the man from the alley, Julian. I recognized its dispassionate tone. "She's in the flat bathroom," Mark stammered. "Look, man, this is just a misunderstanding. Mr. Volkov doesn't believe in misunderstandings," Julian said. The name hit me like a physical blow. Volkov. I'd heard that name before, whispered in the clinic, spoken in hushed tones on the news. It was a name associated with shadows and power, with a criminal empire that ran the city's underbelly with an iron fist. The man I had saved, he was a Volkov. A gentle knock came on the bathroom door. "Miss Jensen, my name is Julian. Mr. Volkov sent me. It is safe to come out." My legs felt like water, but I somehow managed to get to my feet and unlock the door. Julian stood there, impassive and immaculate in a dark suit, looking utterly out of place in my dingy hallway. Behind him, another man, just as large and imposing, held Mark by the arm. Mark looked pale and shrunken, his eyes wide with terror. He looked at me, a desperate, pleading expression on his face. I felt nothing. No pity, no sympathy. Just a vast, cold emptiness. "Miss Jensen," Julian said, his eyes meeting mine. They were professional, revealing nothing. "Mr. Volkov has instructed us to escort you and your son to a secure location. Please pack a bag with whatever essentials you require for a few days." It wasn't a question, it was a directive. My mind reeled. A secure location? Pack a bag? This was moving too fast. "What are you going to do with him?" I asked, nodding toward Mark. "That is not your concern," Julian said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Mr. Volkov will handle the situation. All you need to do is focus on yourself and your child. We have a doctor waiting to see to your son's cough." The mention of a doctor for Leo cut through my confusion. That was a language I understood. It was a lure I couldn't resist. My son's health was my ultimate vulnerability, my Achilles heel, and this Damien Volkov, this shadowy crime lord, knew it. He had listened to every word I'd said, every piece of my desperation, and he was using it all. I moved as if in a trance, going to Leo's room and gently waking him. He was groggy and confused, but he didn't cry. I packed a small bag with his favorite pajamas, his worn teddy bear, his inhaler, and a few changes of clothes for both of us. My hands moved on autopilot, my brain struggling to catch up with the seismic shift that was occurring in my reality. I was being extracted, plucked from my life of quiet desperation by a force of nature I had accidentally stitched up in an alley. When I emerged from the bedroom with a sleepy Leo in my arms, Mark was gone. So was the other man. Only Julian remained, waiting patiently by the open door. The apartment already felt different, like an empty stage after the play has ended. "This way, Miss Jensen," he said, gesturing down the hallway. The sight that greeted me outside my building stole my breath. Lined up along the curb were 3 identical black SUVs, their tinted windows like the eyes of sleek, powerful beasts. They hummed with a quiet power, their presence turning my rundown street into a movie set. Neighbors peeked from behind their curtains, their faces a mixture of fear and awe. This wasn't just a show of force, it was a declaration. It was Damien Volkov planting a flag in my life. Julian opened the door to the middle vehicle, and I slid inside, settling Leo onto the plush leather seat beside me. The interior was silent and smelled of rich leather and clean, conditioned air. It was a world away from the rattling city bus I took to work every day. The door closed with a heavy, soundproof thump, sealing us inside, shutting out the world I knew. As the SUV pulled away from the curb in a smooth, silent procession, I looked back at my apartment building. It looked small and shabby, a life I was leaving behind. I didn't know if I was being rescued or kidnapped. Perhaps, I thought with a terrifying clarity, it was both. The gilded cage was closing around me, and I hadn't even seen the bars yet. The journey was a silent, fluid glide through the rain-slicked city streets. The tinted windows turned the familiar landscape into a dark, anonymous blur, further cementing the feeling that I was being transported to another reality entirely. Leo, lulled by the smooth motion and the deep hum of the engine, fell back asleep, his head resting in my lap. I stroked his fine hair, his warmth, a small, solid anchor in the swirling chaos of my thoughts. Who was Damien Volkov? What did a man like that want with a woman like me? You helped me. I pay my debts. His words echoed in my mind, but they felt insufficient to explain the sheer scale of this intervention. This wasn't paying a debt. This was an acquisition. We left the city behind, the dense urban sprawl, giving way to winding roads and towering trees. Eventually, the convoy turned onto a private road, marked by a formidable wrought iron gate that swung open silently as we approached. We drove for another minute down a long gravel driveway, lined with perfectly manicured hedges, before a house, no, a mansion, emerged from the misty darkness. It was less a home and more a fortress of modern architecture, a breathtaking structure of glass, dark stone, and rich mahogany. It was built into a hillside, overlooking a view I couldn't yet see, its many windows glowing with a warm, inviting light that seemed to mock the stormy night. It was the kind of wealth that was so vast, so absolute, it felt like a different species of existence. I thought of the peeling paint in my hallway, the persistent leak in Leo's ceiling, and a wave of dizzying vertigo washed over me. Julian opened my door, and I stepped out, hoisting a still sleepy Leo onto my hip. The air here was different, clean and sharp, smelling of pine and wet earth instead of exhaust fumes and decay. We were led inside, through massive double doors, into a foyer that was larger than my entire apartment. The floors were a gleaming, cream-colored marble, reflecting the light from a spectacular crystal chandelier that hung 2 stories above us. A grand, sweeping staircase curved its way to the 2nd floor. The walls were adorned with art that looked like it belonged in a museum, abstract canvases and stark, powerful sculptures. The silence was the most intimidating part. It was a heavy, opulent silence, broken only by the distant crackle of a fireplace. A woman with silver hair pulled into a severe bun, dressed in a crisp black uniform, greeted us. "Miss Jensen, welcome. My name is Elena. I am the housekeeper. We have prepared rooms for you and the young master." Young master? The term was so archaic, so foreign, it made me want to laugh or cry. I followed Elena up the grand staircase, my worn sneakers silent on the plush runner. She led us to a suite of rooms in a quiet wing of the house. It wasn't just a bedroom, it was an apartment unto itself. A spacious sitting room with a fireplace and floor-to-ceiling windows. A bedroom with a bed so large it could comfortably sleep. A family of 4, and an ensuite bathroom that was a study in marble and chrome. A crib had been set up in a small alcove off the main bedroom, the sheets already turned down. "A pediatrician is on his way to see to your son," Elena informed me, her tone polite but distant. "Dr. Ramsey is the best in his field. Your son will have excellent care. Please, make yourself comfortable. A meal will be brought up for you shortly." She left, closing the door softly behind her. I gently laid Leo in the crib. He stirred, coughed once, and then settled back into a deep sleep, oblivious to the gilded cage we had just entered. I walked over to the vast window. The rain had softened to a drizzle, and through the mist, I could see the glittering panorama of the city lights spread out far below. I was looking down on the world I had just been ripped from, a god on a mountain I had never asked to climb. It was beautiful and terrifying. I felt like a specimen under glass, a curiosity brought here for the amusement of a man I barely knew. Dr. Ramsey arrived 20 minutes later, a kind-faced man with gentle hands and a calm demeanor. He examined Leo with a thoroughness and patience no clinic doctor ever had the time for. He diagnosed a mild case of bronchitis, exacerbated by the dampness of our apartment. He produced a nebulizer and the correct medication from his bag as if by magic, and assured me it would clear up within a few days. He spoke of follow-up appointments and specialist consultations as if money were no object, because here, it clearly wasn't. After the doctor left, I sat on the edge of the enormous bed, feeling small and utterly lost. I had been stripped of all my problems, rent, food, medical bills, Mark, but I had also been stripped of my agency. My life was no longer my own. I was a protected species, a pet project. I was waiting for the owner of the zoo to appear. He came an hour later. There was a soft knock on the door, and before I could answer, it opened. Damien Volkov stepped inside. He was not the man from the alley. That man had been wounded, weakened, brought down to a mortal level. This man was something else entirely. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, a crisp white shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He moved with a silent, fluid grace that was mesmerizing and deeply unsettling. The wound on his side seemed to have vanished, leaving no trace of the vulnerability I had witnessed. His storm gray eyes were clear and sharp, and they pinned me in place from across the room. He was the apex predator in his natural habitat, and I was the foreign creature introduced into his territory. "Alara," he said. My name was a low rumble in the quiet room. He walked over to the fireplace, where a fire now blazed merrily, and stood before it, one hand resting on the marble mantelpiece. The flames cast flickering shadows across his harshly handsome face, making him look like a dark prince from some violent fairy tale. "Are you and your son comfortable?" he asked. It was a polite question, but it held no real curiosity. He already knew the answer. "Where is Mark?" I asked, my voice coming out stronger than I expected. I needed to know. I needed to understand the rules of this new reality. A flicker of something annoyance perhaps crossed his features. "Mark is no longer your concern. He has been given a generous incentive to relocate. Far away. He will not be returning." The finality in his tone was absolute. He had erased my problem with money and the threat of violence. just like that. "Why am I here?" I asked, getting to the heart of it. "Why do all this for me? I put a bandage on you. That's all." Damien turned his full attention to me. He pushed off the mantelpiece and walked slowly toward me, his gaze never leaving my face. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that I could smell the faint, clean scent of his cologne, a subtle mix of sandalwood and something else I couldn't place. It smelled like wealth, like power. "You did more than that," he said, his voice dropping to a confidential, almost intimate level. "You came into a dark alley in the middle of the night to help a bleeding stranger. You weren't afraid. Or if you were, you didn't let it stop you. You showed compassion, a quality I rarely encounter in my world." He paused, his eyes scanning my face, as if searching for that quality again. "I had my men looking for you since that night," he admitted. "A nurse, working late, fitting your description. There are thousands in this city. I was beginning to think I'd imagined you. Your call, it was a gift." "A gift?" I echoed, bewildered. "I called you because I was terrified, because my ex was trying to hurt me and I had nowhere else to turn." "Exactly," he said, a faint, humorless smile touching his lips. "You were in trouble, and you called me. You turned to me for protection, and I will provide it." This was it, the offer, the terms and conditions of my new life. "What does that mean?" I asked, my heart beginning to pound. "Provide it?" "It means you and Leo will live here," he stated, gesturing to the opulent room around us. "You will want for nothing. Your son will have the best medical care, the best schools, anything he needs. Your debts will be cleared. You will never have to work another double shift at a clinic again. You will be safe, cared for, protected." The words were a siren song, promising everything I had ever dreamed of. A life free from the constant grinding anxiety of poverty. A future for my son that wasn't limited by my income. Safety. It was all so tempting, a beautiful shining mirage in the desert of my life. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that nothing this perfect came without a price. "And in return?" I whispered. Damien's gaze intensified. It was like being pinned by a physical force. "In return," he said slowly, deliberately, "you will be mine. You will stay here, under my roof. You will not leave this property without my knowledge and my permission. Your life outside these gates is over. Your new life is here, with me." There it was, the bars of the gilded cage, snapping shut. He wasn't offering me a partnership. He was offering me ownership. I would be his possession, a beautiful, well-cared-for pet. My throat went dry. The sheer arrogance, the absolute certainty with which he laid out the terms of my surrender was breathtaking. "You can't just own a person," I said, the words feeling feeble even as I spoke them. "Can't I?" he countered, his voice dangerously soft. "I own shipping companies, real estate, politicians. Owning one person's loyalty, their safety, their future. It seems a simple enough transaction. I am offering you a paradise, Alara. The only price is the cage." I stared at him, at this impossible, terrifying man who thought he could buy and sell human lives like commodities. I should have been furious. I should have been screaming. But all I could feel was a profound, soul-deep weariness, and a strange, treacherous flicker of something else. Something that recognized the raw, possessive power in him and wasn't entirely repulsed by it. After years of being leaned on, of being the strong one, there was a dark, seductive appeal in the idea of simply letting go. of letting someone else carry the entire weight of the world. He must have seen the conflict in my eyes, the war between my pride and my desperation. He took another step closer, his presence overwhelming in the suddenly small space. "You think I am a monster," he murmured, his voice a low thrum of sound. "And you are not wrong. In my world you must be a monster to survive. But even monsters have their reasons." He looked away from me then, his gaze drifting toward the fire, and for a fleeting moment, the mask of cold command slipped. I saw a flicker of old pain in his eyes, a shadow of a wound far deeper than the one I had treated. "My mother," he began, his voice tight with a pain that was clearly still raw, decades later. "She was like you, kind, compassionate. She worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over our heads after my father left. She trusted the wrong people. She thought that if she was good, the world would be good to her. It wasn't." He fell silent, and the crackling of the fire filled the void. I watched him, mesmerized, waiting. A man, a landlord, much like your Mark but with more power, took advantage of her vulnerability. He bled her dry, then threw us out on the street. She got sick. The cold, the damp, it got into her lungs. There were no private doctors for us, no fancy medications. He looked back at me, his eyes blazing with a cold, ancient fury. I was 15 when I watched her die in a charity ward, coughing her life away. I held her hand, and I swore on her grave that I would never be powerless again, and that I would never ever stand by and watch a good woman be destroyed by a weak, pathetic man. The story hung between us, a raw, exposed nerve. It explained everything. His obsession with me, his need to protect, to possess, to control. I wasn't just a debt to be repaid. I was a ghost. A chance for him to rewrite the ending of the story that had forged him into the man he was. He wasn't saving me. He was saving his mother, over and over again. "I am not your mother," I said softly. "No," he agreed, his voice regaining its hard edge. "You are not. You are Ilara, and you are under my protection now. That is the beginning and the end of it." He turned and walked toward the door, his point made, the discussion, in his mind, clearly over. He paused with his hand on the doorknob. "Rest," he said, without looking back at me. "Elena has bought you some new clothes. Your old life is over. We will begin the new one tomorrow." The door clicked shut behind him, leaving me alone in the opulent silence. I sank onto the silk comforter, my body trembling. He had laid it all bare: the cage, the price, and the twisted, tragic justification behind it. I had no choice, not really. To refuse was to be sent back to the wolves, to the eviction notices and the empty cupboards, and the terror of men like Mark. To accept was to trade my freedom for a golden cage, to become the ward of a crime lord with a mother complex. I looked over at my son, sleeping peacefully in his safe, warm crib, his breathing already sounding easier. For him, this place was a miracle. For him, I would do anything, even this. I would learn to live in the cage. I might even, I thought with a terrifying shiver of foresight, learn to love the monster who had built it. The next few days passed in a surreal haze, a disorienting blend of luxury and confinement. I woke up in sheets with a thread count higher than my old bank balance. Elena appeared with gourmet meals on silver trays. Clothes appeared in the closets, soft cashmere sweaters, perfectly fitting jeans, elegant dresses all in my size, all chosen with an impeccable, impersonal taste. It was as if a ghost staff catered to my every need before I even knew I had it. They were polite, efficient, and utterly remote, their faces smooth, unreadable masks. I was the mistress of a house where I had no authority, a guest with a life sentence. Damien remained a distant, powerful presence. I would glimpse him from my window, striding across the manicured lawns, speaking into a phone, always flanked by Julian or other men with the same watchful, predatory stillness. He never came to my suite again, but I felt his influence in everything, in the quality of the food I ate, the softness of the towels in the bathroom, the quiet hum of the state-of-the-art air purifier in Leo's room. He was an invisible god, shaping my new universe to his exact specifications. My world had shrunk to the confines of the mansion and its sprawling, immaculate grounds. It was a beautiful prison. There were gardens with blooming roses that defied the autumn chill, a library stocked with thousands of leather-bound books, an indoor pool where the water was always the perfect temperature. I took Leo for walks along the gravel paths, his small hand in mine. He was thriving. The cough was gone, replaced by a happy, bubbling laugh. The color had returned to his cheeks. He chased butterflies and pointed at the stern-faced men who stood guard at the perimeter, calling them the giant statues. He was safe and happy, and every time I looked at his smiling face, the bars of my cage seemed to shimmer and fade a little. But at night, when Leo was asleep and the house was wrapped in its heavy silence, the anxiety would return. I was living in a bubble, a fragile ecosystem maintained by a man who operated in a world of violence and shadows. I had traded one set of dangers for another, far more lethal one. The first crack in the bubble appeared a week after my arrival. I was in the library, a vast two-story room with soaring shelves and the comforting smell of old paper and lemon polish. I was searching for a children's book for Leo when I heard voices from the adjoining study, Damien's office. The door was slightly ajar. I knew I should walk away, that eavesdropping in this house was probably a capital offense, but I was starved for information, for any clue about the world outside my cage. I froze, pressing myself into the shadows of a bookshelf. "The Petrovs are getting bold," Julian's flat voice stated. "The attack on you was just the beginning. They hit one of our warehouses on the docks last night, torched the whole place. Petrovs. The name meant nothing to me, but the tone of Julian's voice sent a chill down my spine. Casualties? Damien's voice was dangerously calm. 2 of our men, another 3 in the hospital. They knew our shipping schedule. We have a leak." There was a long silence. I could picture Damien standing behind his massive desk, his face a mask of cold fury. The man I'd seen in the alley, bleeding and vulnerable, was the result of this conflict. These Petrovs were the reason he'd been there for me to find. "And the woman?" Damien asked, his voice changing, dropping to a lower, more personal register that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Is there any chatter about her?" "Not yet," Julian replied. "They don't know she's here. They don't know she exists. As far as they're concerned, you were alone that night." "Keep it that way," Damien commanded. "Double the perimeter guards. No one gets in or out without my direct authorization. She is not to leave the house, under any circumstances. Is that understood?" "Understood, boss." My blood ran cold. They were talking about me. I was a secret, a liability. My presence here, which Damien had framed as his choice, his personal project, was also a strategic risk. I was a vulnerability, a weak point in his armor. The thought was nauseating. He wasn't just protecting me from my past. He was hiding me from his present. I slipped away from the door, my heart pounding. I retreated to my suite, the sanctuary that now felt like a target. The beautiful gardens, The sprawling lawns. They were no longer a playground. They were a kill box. The silent, watchful guards weren't just keeping me in. They were trying to keep the horrors of Damien's world out. Later that day, Damien sought me out. He found me by the indoor pool, watching Leo splash happily in the shallow end. He didn't say a word about the Petrovs or the warehouse fire. He simply came and stood beside me, his presence a heavy weight in the humid air. "He looks well," Damien observed, his eyes on my son. For the first time, I saw something other than command or possession in his gaze. It was a flicker of something softer, something almost wistful. The doctor was right. The clean air, the medicine, it's made all the difference, I admitted. "This is how it should be," he said, more to himself than to me. "A child should be safe, cared for." He turned to me then, his gray eyes serious. "Alara, I need to impress something upon you. For the next few weeks, it is imperative that you and Leo remain inside the main house. The grounds are not as secure as I would like." "I heard you," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "In the library." "About the Petrovs." His face hardened, the brief softness vanishing as if it had never been. A muscle feathered in his jaw. "You should not have been listening. This is my life now, isn't it?" I countered, a spark of my old defiance flaring up. "My son's life. Don't I have a right to know what dangers you've brought to our doorstep?" I expected him to be furious, to shut me down with a cold command. Instead, he looked at me with a startling intensity, a grudging respect dawning in his eyes. "Yes," he said, his voice quiet. "You do. You have a right to know." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The Petrov family and mine have been rivals for generations, an old war that has recently become new again. They are ruthless. They believe in striking at a man's weaknesses. They see compassion as a liability." He looked pointedly at me. "That is why you must stay here. It is not a suggestion, Alara. It is a necessity. This house is a fortress. It is the only place I can guarantee your safety." His words, meant to reassure, only terrified me more. The gilded cage had transformed. It was no longer a prison to keep me from my old life. It was a bunker to protect me from his. The threat wasn't abstract anymore. It had a name, Petrov. And they were the reason Damien was turning my world into a lockdown. He was using this external threat to justify my confinement, to solidify his control. And the most terrifying part was, he was right. I looked at Leo, laughing as he slapped the water, and I knew I would do anything to keep him safe. I would trade my freedom 1,000 times over. I would lock the door myself. "I understand," I said, my voice hollow. "Good," he said, his tone softening almost imperceptibly. "This will be over soon. I will end it." He turned and walked away, leaving me with the echo of his promise. "I will end it." It sounded less like a resolution and more like a declaration of war. And I and my son were now living at the heart of the battlefield. The weight of his protection was becoming heavier every day, a suit of armor that was also a shroud. The atmosphere in the house grew tense over the following week. The number of guards visibly doubled. Men with hard faces and watchful eyes were everywhere, their presence a constant, unnerving reminder of the invisible siege we were under. The quiet efficiency of the staff was now tinged with a nervous energy. I saw Julian more frequently, his face a grim, unreadable mask as he conferred with Damien in low, urgent tones. Damien himself was a coiled spring of lethal energy. He was on the phone constantly, his voice a low, dangerous weapon as he issued commands. I saw the monster now, in his element, and it was a terrifying sight. He was preparing for war, and the preparations were happening all around me. Cars came and went at all hours of the night. Men I'd never seen before, men with the cold eyes of lifelong soldiers, arrived and were sequestered in a wing of the house I was not permitted to enter. The fortress was arming itself. Amidst this escalating tension, Damien made a move to neutralize the last lingering ghost of my old life. One evening, Julian appeared at the door of my suite. "Miss Jensen," he said, his voice as impassive as ever. "Mr. Volkov requires your presence in his study." My stomach twisted. I had not been summoned to the heart of his power before. I followed Julian through the silent, watchful house to the study I had previously only glimpsed. It was a deeply masculine room, paneled in dark wood, dominated by a desk the size of a small boat. One wall was a bank of monitors, displaying security feeds from every corner of the estate. Damien was not sitting behind the desk. He stood by the fireplace, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, staring into the flames, and sitting in a chair in front of the desk, looking pale and utterly terrified, was Mark. My breath caught in my throat. I stopped dead in the doorway, my eyes locked on the pathetic figure of my ex-boyfriend. He was disheveled, his clothes rumpled, and his eyes were wide with a primal fear I had never seen in him before. Two of Damien's guards stood behind his chair, their presence making the air thick with menace. "Alara," Damien said, without turning. "Come in." I forced my legs to move, stepping into the room. The door closed behind me. Mark flinched when he saw me, a pathetic whimper escaping his lips. "Lara, tell them," he pleaded, his voice a reedy whine. "Tell them it was a mistake. I was just upset. I wouldn't have hurt you, you know that." I said nothing. I just looked at him, at the man who had caused me so much pain, so much fear, and I felt a profound and chilling detachment. He seemed like a character from a book I had read a long, long time ago. Damien finally turned from the fire, his eyes like chips of ice. He walked over and stood behind Mark's chair, placing a heavy hand on his shoulder. Mark trembled violently at the touch. "I believe in tying up loose ends," Damien said, his voice a soft purr that was more terrifying than any shout. His gaze was fixed on me. "This insect has been a source of distress for you. I thought it best to resolve the matter permanently." He looked down at the top of Mark's head. "You have two options, Mark. My associate, Julian, has prepared a plane ticket for you to a very remote location in Alaska. He has also prepared a bank account with enough money for you to start a new life. You will take it. You will get on that plane, and you will forget Alara's name. You will forget her son's name. You will never attempt to contact her or see her again for the rest of your miserable life." "And the second option?" Mark squeaked, his voice barely audible. Damien's smile was a razor slash in the firelight. "You don't want to know the second option." The silence in the room was absolute. Mark was shaking so hard the chair rattled. "I'll go," he whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "I'll go. I'll never come back, I swear." "I know you won't," Damien said softly. He looked at Julian. "Escort him to the airfield. Make sure he gets on the plane." Julian nodded, and he and the guards hauled Mark to his feet. They dragged him from the room, his pleas and promises echoing faintly down the hall before being cut off by a closing door. I stood frozen, my heart a block of ice in my chest. I had just witnessed a man's life being irrevocably altered, his future erased, and rewritten by the man standing in front of me. It was a staggering, brutal display of power. It was terrifying. and a dark, shameful part of me was relieved. A weight I had been carrying for years had just been lifted, cut away with a surgeon's ruthless precision. "He will never trouble you again," Damien said, stating it as a fact. I looked at him, truly looked at the cold, hard man who had just dismantled my past. "Was that for me?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. "Or was that for you? To prove a point?" He walked toward me, closing the space between us until he stood directly in front of me. He reached out, gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear. His touch was surprisingly gentle, a stark contrast to the violence of his actions. "Does it matter?" he murmured, his thumb brushing against my cheek. "The result is the same. You are free of him." His gaze was intense, searching. He was showing me what he was capable of, the lengths he would go to in order to eliminate a threat to me, to his possession. It was a warning and a promise, all at once. That night, he left the house. I watched from my window as a convoy of the black SUVs, including the one carrying Damien, swept down the long driveway and out through the gates. He was going to war. He was going to end the threat of the Petrovs. The house felt unnervingly empty without him, a vast, silent shell. The tension was gone, replaced by a hollow, waiting dread. I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the rain start to fall again, my arms wrapped around myself. I thought of the man bleeding in the alley, and the man who had just banished my ex with a quiet word. They were the same person, a monster and a savior, inextricably intertwined, and I was bound to him, for better or for worse. The waiting was the worst part. An entire day passed, then a night, then another day. The house remained on lockdown, silent and tense. Julian was gone, as were most of the senior guards. Only a skeleton crew remained, their faces grimmer than usual. Elena and the staff moved about like ghosts, their silence deeper, more profound. No one would tell me anything. I was the protected asset, locked in the vault while the battle raged outside. My powerlessness was absolute. I could do nothing but pace the confines of my suite and care for Leo, who remained blissfully unaware of the violent storm raging just beyond our sanctuary's walls. I tried to read, but the words blurred on the page. I tried to watch movies, but the fictional dramas seemed pale and ridiculous compared to the reality of my situation. My anxiety was a physical thing, a tight band around my chest that made it difficult to breathe. Every time I heard a car on the gravel driveway, my heart would leap into my throat, a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. But it was always a supply truck or a change of guard, not him. On the second night, I was sitting in the dark, watching the distant city lights, when I finally heard the familiar, deep-throated rumble of the convoy. My breath hitched. I pressed my face to the cold glass, my eyes straining to see through the darkness. The line of black SUVs swept up the driveway, their headlights cutting through the night. They looked different. One of them had a shattered passenger window, and the side of another was scraped and dented. They had seen battle. I didn't wait. I ran from my suite, my bare feet silent on the plush carpets. I flew down the grand staircase just as the front doors opened. Julian entered first, his face streaked with grime, his suit torn at the shoulder. He looked exhausted, but he was moving with the grim satisfaction of a soldier returning from a victorious campaign. Other men followed, equally worn, but alive. And then, Damien was there. He filled the doorway, his broad shoulders seeming to block out the night behind him. He looked like he had walked through hell. His hair was damp and disheveled. There was a dark bruise high on his cheekbone, and his left hand was wrapped in a makeshift blood-stained bandage. But he was standing. He was alive. His storm-gray eyes swept the foyer and landed on me, standing at the bottom of the stairs. The world seemed to shrink until it was only the two of us. The noise and movement of his men faded into a distant buzz. He walked toward me, his limp almost imperceptible. He didn't stop until he was standing right in front of me, his shadow falling over me. He looked down at me, his gaze intense, raw, stripped of all its usual layers of command and control. In his eyes, I saw not the crime lord, not the monster, but a man, weary to his very soul, who had gone out and slain dragons and had come home seeking what? Sanctuary? Absolution? Without a word, without thinking, I reached up and gently touched the bruise on his cheek. His skin was cold. He flinched almost imperceptibly at my touch, then leaned into it, a shudder running through his powerful frame. He closed his eyes for a moment, a deep, ragged breath escaping his lips. It was a surrender, a moment of pure, unguarded vulnerability that shattered the last of my defenses. "It's over," he said, his voice a rough, exhausted rasp. "The Petrovs are broken. Their leadership is gone. It's finished. You're safe." Tears. I didn't know. I'd been holding back welled in my eyes. It wasn't just relief. It was something more complex, something overwhelming. He had plunged his world into violence, risked his life, all to secure the walls of my cage, to make my sanctuary absolute. He had killed. For me, the thought should have horrified me. Instead, it struck a deep, primal chord within me. No one had ever fought for me. No one had ever put my safety above all else. He opened his eyes, and they were dark with exhaustion and an emotion I couldn't name. He lifted his uninjured hand and cupped my face, his thumb stroking my jaw. His touch was hesitant, almost questioning, as if he expected me to pull away. "I was afraid," he confessed, his voice so low I could barely hear it. "Not for me. In my world, fear is a constant companion, but I was afraid for you, for your son, the thought of them, finding you." He couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. That was it. That was the crack in his armor, the admission that broke me open. This man of iron and violence, who commanded an army and bent the world to his will, had been afraid for me. In that moment, he wasn't my captor. He wasn't the monster. He was just Damien, and I was lost. I leaned in, rising on my toes, and pressed my lips to his. It was a kiss that was 1,000 things at once. It was gratitude and relief, fear and fascination. It was the sealing of a pact made in a dark, rainy alley. For a second he was utterly still, as if shocked by my audacity. Then a low groan rumbled deep in his chest, and his arms came around me, pulling me hard against him. His kiss deepened, becoming hungry, possessive, a desperate claiming. He tasted of the cold night air, of whiskey, and of victory. It was overwhelming, intoxicating. I clung to him, my hands tangling in his hair, surrendering completely to the storm I had unleashed. He was the one who broke the kiss, resting his forehead against mine, his breathing harsh and uneven. We stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms in the grand foyer, while his men melted away into the shadows, leaving us in a bubble of charged intimacy. "Go to bed, Alara," he murmured, his voice thick. "We'll talk in the morning." He released me, and it felt like a physical loss. I watched him walk stiffly toward his study, the weight of the night still heavy on his shoulders. I went back upstairs, my lips still tingling, my body still humming with the force of his touch. The war outside was over, but a new one, a war of the heart, had just begun. And I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that I had already surrendered. The next morning, the house was transformed. The tension had vanished, replaced by a quiet, relaxed atmosphere. The extra guards were gone. The sun was streaming through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It felt like the world had been scrubbed clean. I found Damien on a wide stone terrace overlooking the gardens. The city sprawled in the distance, hazy and peaceful. He was dressed in casual clothes, a soft dark sweater and pants, and the sight was so disarmingly normal, it almost made me forget the man he was. The bruise on his cheek was darker today, and his injured hand was now professionally wrapped. He was staring out at the view, a cup of coffee in his good hand. He turned as I approached, his expression unreadable. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm and rested. "Is it really over?" I asked, needing to hear it again in the clear light of day. "Yes," he confirmed. "It's over. The threat is gone." He took a sip of his coffee, his eyes never leaving my face. "Which means we need to discuss your future." My heart skipped a beat. This was it. The moment of reckoning. "When I brought you here," he began, setting his cup down on the stone balustrade, "it was to protect you. From Mark, from the world. Then, it was to protect you from my enemies. All of those threats are now neutralized." He walked over to me, his gaze direct and serious. "The terms of our arrangement have changed, Ilara. The cage is no longer necessary for your survival. You are free to go." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Free to go? After everything? After last night? I stared at him, my mind reeling. "I have instructed my lawyers to set up a trust for you and Leo," he continued, his voice maddeningly level, as if he were discussing a business transaction. "It will be more than enough to ensure you never have to worry about money again. I will buy you a house, anywhere you like. A car. I will cover Leo's education, his medical expenses, for the rest of his life. You will be provided for. You will be safe, and you will be free of me." He was offering me the perfect escape. Everything I could have ever wanted, with no strings attached. The golden parachute from the gilded cage. I should have been ecstatic. I should have been crying with relief. Instead, a cold, desolate dread filled me. The thought of leaving this house, of leaving him, was unbearable. My old life was gone, and I had no desire to go back to it. My new life, this strange, violent, protected existence, had become my reality. He had become my reality. "Is that what you want?" I asked, my voice trembling. "For me to go?" A flicker of emotion, something raw and vulnerable, crossed his face before he masked it again. "What I want is irrelevant. This was never meant to be a prison. It was meant to be a sanctuary. The danger has passed. I am giving you the choice I should have given you in the beginning. It was the ultimate test. He was giving me an out, a clean break. He was offering me a life of independent security, far from his dark world. It was a noble gesture in its own twisted way. He was letting his songbird fly free. I looked past him, at the beautiful, manicured gardens, at the fortress that had become my home. I thought of Leo, sleeping safely upstairs, healthier and happier than he had ever been. I thought of the terror of my old life, the constant, grinding fear. And I thought of the man in front of me, the monster who had shown me his wounds, the captor who had fought a war for me, the man who had kissed me with a desperate, possessive hunger that I had matched with my own. Freedom was a cold, empty house somewhere. Safety was here. Home was here. No, I said, my voice clear and strong. He stilled, his gray eyes searching mine. No, I don't want the house, I said, taking a step closer to him. I don't want the trust fund. I don't want to be free of you. I took a deep breath, laying my heart bare. My old life is over. You ended it. You brought me into this world. You made me a part of it. You can't just send me away now that it's convenient. I don't belong out there anymore. I reached out and placed my hand on his chest, over his heart. I could feel its steady, powerful beat beneath my palm. I belong here. A tremor went through him. He covered my hand with his own, his grip tight, almost painful. He stared down at me, his face a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Alara, you don't know what you're asking for, he rasped, his voice thick with a pain that tore at my heart. To stay with me, it isn't a fairy tale. My world will always be dangerous. There will always be other enemies. To be with me is to wear a target on your back for the rest of your life. Then I'll wear it, I said simply. I'm not the same woman you found in that alley. I'm not afraid anymore. The only thing that frightens me is the thought of leaving you. It was the truth, the raw, unvarnished, terrifying truth. I had fallen for my captor. I was in love with Damien Volkov. He searched my eyes, looking for any hint of doubt, any flicker of fear. He found none. There was only a calm, resolute certainty. I had made my choice. With a low groan, he pulled me into his arms, crushing me against him. He buried his face in my hair, his whole body trembling with the force of his emotion. You have no idea what you do to me, he muttered into my hair. I have spent my entire life building walls, and you walk through them like they're not even there. He pulled back, his hands framing my face. The look in his eyes was one of fierce, blazing possession, but it was tempered now with a deep, soul-shaking tenderness. It was the look of a man who had just been given a gift he never believed he deserved. If you stay, he said, his voice a solemn vow, you stay as my wife, as the mother of my children, as the lady of this house, in title and in fact, not as my ward, not as my possession, as my partner, my queen. My breath hitched. It wasn't a proposition, it was a coronation. He was offering me not just his protection, but his name, his future, his entire world. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It was a stunning, vintage piece, a large sapphire surrounded by a halo of diamonds, set in platinum. It was elegant, timeless, and impossibly beautiful. This was my mother's, he said, his voice soft. She loved it, he gave. Took it to her in the beginning, when things were good. She gave it to me before she died. She told me to give it to a woman who was worthy of it. A woman with a kind heart and a strong spirit. He looked deep into my eyes. I have been keeping it for you, Alara. I think I have been keeping it for you my whole life. Tears streamed down my face as he slipped the ring onto my finger. It was a perfect fit. The cool weight of it on my hand was a tangible symbol of the new life I was choosing, the future I was claiming. Yes, I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. Yes, Damien, I'll stay. His smile, a real, genuine smile that transformed his harsh features and lit up his eyes, was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. He leaned down and kissed me, not with the desperate hunger of the night before, but with a deep, reverent tenderness that sealed his promise. It was a kiss of new beginnings, of a future forged in violence and redeemed by a love that was as fierce and dangerous as the man himself. Later that afternoon we were in the garden. Damien was pushing Leo on a swing he'd had his men install that morning. his earlier severity completely gone, replaced by a gentle, focused attention on my son. Leo's delighted laughter filled the air, a bright, happy sound that echoed off the stone walls of the house, our house. I sat on a nearby bench, the sapphire on my finger catching the afternoon sun, sending out sparks of brilliant blue light. The world outside these walls was still filled with shadows, and I knew that Damien's life would always carry the risk of danger. But here, in this sanctuary he had built, I was no longer a prisoner. I was home. The storm had passed, and in its wake, against all odds, I had found not just safety, but a fierce and profound love. I watched the powerful, dangerous man I was going to marry push my laughing child higher and higher into the bright, clear sky, and I knew, with every fiber of my being, that my accidental encounter on that rainy night hadn't been an accident at all. It had been fate.